Hi there, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I want to talk about the 4 quadrants of learning anything. So on this channel, I mostly focus on language learning, but in reality, when we learn anything, we tend to always go through the same process. So the process I will describe to you follows 2 different continuums. One is about competence, so how well you're able to do something, and the other follows consciousness, so your awareness of how well you're able to do something. So the 4 buckets are unconscious incompetent, conscious incompetent, conscious competent, and unconscious competent. So let's go through these one by one. So in the first one, you are unconscious and you're incompetent. I'm going to use the example of a leader, say a CEO of a company, to illustrate the point. So an unconscious incompetent leader is somebody who thinks they're great at leading an organization, but in reality, things are going horribly wrong. The employees hate working there. The customers don't want to buy the products. Maybe the logistics of how they run things is just totally broken and the system isn't working. Things aren't getting through. Nobody knows where the money's going. Like, this is a really incompetent leader, okay? But if it's an unconscious incompetent leader, this leader thinks they're just so great and like everybody just loves me and I'm doing a wonderful job here, right? Unconscious incompetent. I imagine many of you have met people like this, and if you haven't, you've certainly heard about it. Okay, terrible place to be, unconscious incompetent. So let's say that company sends out a survey to their customers and their employee, and they get the results back, and then they learn everybody hates working here and everybody hates working with us, okay? So then they wake up and they're like, oh my God, we are awful. So that at that point, they would become conscious of their incompetence. So now they have awareness that they're terrible leaders. And if they decide to work at it and they do in fact improve, let's say they hire consultants and business coaches and they get in new staff who have better skills and better management to manage those staff, and things just start improving. And suddenly, like say 2 years later, they send out another survey, and by and large, the employees are happy and the customers are also satisfied and people like working there and like working with them, and there are no major problems anymore. Then they will have moved into the conscious competent bucket. So in this world, things are working really well, but we also have to think about how it's working. Like, we're making a concerted effort to make sure things work well. That is conscious competence, okay? The last bucket would be unconscious competence. This is also an excellent place to be because in this world, the CEO just runs things really well, and by and large, things work out really well without anybody having to think too hard in terms of how they do their job and the decisions that they make. Things just work, okay? Unconscious, yet still competent. Also an excellent place to be. So now let's take this framework of thinking about the learning process and let's apply it specifically to language learning. So an unconscious incompetent person, that first bucket, might be somebody who has never even heard a language exists. There are a lot of languages that only a small number of people speak, and even though I've studied this topic a lot, I haven't heard of all of them. I would be unconscious and incompetent in any of those languages I've never even heard about, for obvious reason, right? Another version of unconscious incompetent is somebody who thinks they're good at speaking a language, but they're actually terrible at it. And you've probably met these people before where if a person who doesn't know that language at all hears them use it, they might think, ooh, wow, that person's great at it. Ooh. And then a native speaker hears them, they're like, oh my God, stop. Like, because they can't understand them, and it's just so like painful painful to have to like interact with this person because this person thinks they're amazing and they're far from it. That would be unconscious and incompetent. Now, let's say something happens and this person, I don't know, they enroll in a school or get a great tutor and they are starting to realize, oh my God, like I'm actually not that good at this. That person would now be conscious of the fact that they are incompetent. So they're still terrible at speaking the language and using the language, but they now realize they're terrible, okay? So then let's say this person works with their tutor for a year or two and things start turning around. And when they are actually using the language, they're actually communicating with other people. They're understanding others and others are understanding them and things are starting to go really well. You know, that would then mean they're veering into the conscious and competent bucket. So this means they actually are doing just fine with the language and they're aware of the fact that they're doing just fine. It may also mean that as they're speaking the language, they have to still think about it. Like they still have to think about the vocabulary they're choosing. They're still doing like what feels like mental math to get the grammar and syntax right. You know, nothing wrong with it, you know, because they're competent, but they're aware that they're still doing work, right? That would be a conscious competent speaker. And then the last category is the unconscious competent speaker. Native speakers are like this because when we speak our own languages, we just do not think about it for the most part. We just talk, we just write, we just read, you know, we just hear. And for the most part, it just all makes sense without us even having to think about it consciously. A lot of people who are learning another language, they want to feel that same way when they're in a second language, a third language, whatever it is. Sometimes they arrive there and sometimes they don't arrive there. It really depends on a lot of different factors, and some of those are in your control and some of those are not in your control. And that's a huge long laundry list of things I could get into, which I can save for another time. What I will say though, is if you can get to that third bucket where you're consciously competent, to me that is success. If you were there and you are still thinking as you're using the language, but you're fully functional or almost fully functional, that to me is success. I have met with and taught many people who want to be fluent in English, who to me appear fluent in English, and they feel disappointed in themselves or that they're lacking in some way because they're not unconscious competent yet. They want to feel the same way in English as they do in their native language. And to me, it's like, I understand that would be more relaxing for you because it would feel like a lot less work. And maybe eventually you'll get there, but that does not mean at all that you are not successful in the language. Some people will get there and many other people will not. It's very common to not arrive in the unconscious competent bucket with a second language because you don't have the inroads from childhood that you do in your native language. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just the way it is. It's the way our brains and minds work. So don't worry about it if you don't arrive to that place in the second language. It's completely normal. One other thing that I'll mention is that when we learn anything, it's not like you completely move all aspects of learning that thing from one bucket to the next, to the next, to the next. Let's just go back to language learning as the example again. In a previous video, I talked about the 4 parts of language: speaking, listening, reading, and writing. You might move through those buckets very quickly in one and very slowly in another, and there is nothing wrong with that. It's completely fine. It's actually what you should expect. And also, within each of those 4 categories, within speaking, like doing public speaking, giving a speech is completely different from having an everyday conversation with your neighbor. So even though both are considered speaking, they are different skill sets. So to learn a new skill set within one of those buckets would mean that you would go through this process again. And that's completely fine and normal and to be expected as well. So just remember that anytime that you learn something new, and there are many new things to learn, especially with language, including in your native language, you will go through this process. You will move through at the rate that you can move through it. It's fine. You will get there as long as you keep doing the work. And if the last stop for you is that third bucket, conscious competence, you're still successful. So I hope it was really helpful for you to hear about this framework and apply it to the language learning process. If you have questions for me, definitely leave them down in the comments below. I want to hear how you're thinking about this. I would love it if you apply this to your language learning process, to self-reflect and think about how you're doing. Because when you are able to identify where you are in the process, you're better able to decide where you want to go next or what you need to do to get to the next place. So you feel like you're more accomplished. If you like this video, definitely hit like and subscribe to get more language learning tips. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.